I'm now going to do my best to get you started in bass fishing. Rod, reel, lure boxes, that kind of stuff. It does not need to cost the earth. The gear is very easy to get your head around. So we're going to talk you right through it and get you out there actually bass fishing. There are any number of different lure rods out there, okay? But we are going to think nice and easy here. Look at something around 8.5, 9 foot, maybe 9'6" long. Look for a rating around 7, 8, 9, 10 to 30, 35 grams, okay? Most bass lures you will end up fishing with will not be over 35 grams. And I bet you any money, most of them will be 30 grams and below. So there's no point going for a sort of like a rod that can cast 70 or 80 grams. It's overpowered, it'll rip your shoulders off, and you won't be able to present and work the lighter lures properly. Go for a spinning reel. Don't mess around with bait casters, that kind of thing. Go for a spinning reel. Again, you don't need a big spinning reel. You're not gonna need more than 150 yards of braid on that reel. So try and match the reel to the rod, as in just make it feel nice. You know, people obsess about how the gear might balance. Don't worry about that. Just let it sit in your hand. If it feels good to you, it's going to feel good when you're fishing. That's all it is. If you go and get into this bass fishing thing, lures, let me assure you, it is the path to ruination. But it doesn't need to be, okay? I joke about it, but when I go bass fishing, I will never take what I can't fit in these 2 lure boxes. And in reality, a lot of bass fishing you do, you can fit everything into 1 lure box, okay? It's all about thinking on your feet, think about where you're going, but also remaining adaptable. You know, we had some fishing this morning, for example. I thought I was going to fish a certain way. I thought I was going to fish on the surface. I caught a fish off the top, then it went dead. If I'd only taken surface lures, I'd have caught no more. But because I'd kind of managed my lure box, I want to be able to fish essentially on top, just below the surface, let's say then 30, 40, 50, 60 centimeters, that kind of depth with the hard lures. And then I also want to be able to bump the bottom. I want to better cover the whole water column. I may not use them all, but let's say you get to a bass mark, you thought about it, you've sort of almost computed like when to be there. If you get there and the water's mucked up, it's full of weed, you've got to move, you don't want to drive an hour back home. We're going to manage our lure box or lure boxes to be able to cover, let's say 90% of the bass fishing you might ever do around the UK or Ireland. And please bear in mind, where you fish, you may not even need a bunch of these lures. Your ground may be ultra shallow, you wouldn't need a certain lure. Your ground may be really deep, you might need something else. So we're going to start on top with a surface lure. That is the slap walker, long casting, very easy to walk. That basically fishes on top of the water. That is what we call a surface lure. That is what you're trying to bring the bass, you're trying to bring them up to hit off the top. It's almost, it's quite a noisy, quite a loud lure. It's come and get me kind of lure. Then when I go just subsurface with a hard lure, I fish a lot of very shallow, reefy, broken ground, which means my hard lure for that needs to swim very, very shallow. That is the gravity shallow, casts great and probably swims about that deep below the surface. You know those kind of boulder fields, those kelp strewn kind of potential tackle graveyards? That is bass ground, okay? These, what I call ultra shallow diving hard lures, just take, look, there's loads of them. Something like the gravity shallow, it's perfect. Gives a bit of a wiggle, whack it out, wind it in, great. Then I have a soft plastic equivalent to that, okay? I love soft plastics. 1 hook, no trebles, nice big weedless hook. Something like the gravity stick paddle tail. We've also got the pulse tail and the pin tail. You rig that on a weedless hook, This is the slender scoop shad. These tails thump in the water and you can get them swimming incredibly shallow. And I love the increased subtlety of soft plastics and the way these are designed. You see how that hook is basically not exposed. When the fish hits, it dries the lure down and it gets hooked again. So don't worry about that. But what it does is it gets you fishing through literally anything, okay? I could show you a spot where I could fish, let's say 50% of it with a shallow diving hard lure, but I want to fish 100% of it, okay? Soft plastics gets me through anything. I would never, ever, ever go bass fishing these days without soft plastics. So these are what I call my ultra shallow plastics. I rig them weedless. These are paddle tails. They thump. Bass love them, okay? Then, if I want to go deeper, the sea's a bit bouncier. I've got a bit of current. When I say bouncy, I mean a rougher sea, all right? That is the sea bass minnow. That is what I call, it's a grippier hard lure. It's designed to fish, let's say, kind of yay deep, so it's below the main turbulent and rougher conditions, and it's very grippy with a very pronounced kind of hard, sort of like rolling, flashing action, okay? Again, I do nothing to these lures like this, apart from whack it out, wind it in. I'm trusting in the inherent action of the lure to do its thing, okay? I told you that I also wanted the ability to fish along the bottom, okay? Generally, I'll turn to something like that. That's the Savage Minnow Weedless. It's got a weighted jig head, weedless hook, we also do the J-hook versions, and a soft plastic paddle tail body. This is a great lure for bumping along the bottom of a reefy ground, bumping on the bottom in current, but also never forget, that is also what I call, it's a whack and crank lure. Whack it out, wind it in. If you forget your hard lures or you need, the conditions are rougher than you thought they'd be, and you want a lure to whack out and wind in, fish that. That tail is thumping. It turns the bass on, it fishes like a hard lure, so you're almost sort of getting 2-3 lures in one with that kind of thing, okay? Then, I love surf fishing for bass. I love fishing strong onshore conditions where I'll chuck metal lures out, okay? The Savage Gear Seeker is lethal for surf fishing. Whack it out, wind it in. But also, if you looked in any lure box I might take fishing, I will never ever go out without at least one metal lure. I may not fish it very much unless in the surf. You know when you go bass fishing a lot, sometimes you will see birds working on bait and you might see bass smashing on the bait. If you need to cast as far as you can get to reach that activity, you need to carry a metal lure. These things are great anyway. Whack them out, they come incredibly shallow. So again, you can fish them a bit like an ultra shallow diving hard lure. It's a metal lure, so it casts miles. Lift your rod tip up, nice and shallow. Ultimate distance, the metal lure will always do it. This is my secret weapon. This is the sand eel pencil, obviously serious sand eel profile, but I reckon this is our most misunderstood lure. Less is so often more in bass fishing. You don't always need a huge amount of action off your lures. I like subtle lures. This thing, lethal. Treat it like a long-range soft plastic. It covers an obscene amount of water. It swims incredibly shallow and incredibly subtly. So you know our paddle tails, our pin tails, our pulse tails, those kind of things, lovely shallow diving lures. This thing will outcast them by a country mile, and if I really need to cover a lot of ground, especially over shallow, reefy, kind of boulder strewn areas, I love the sand eel pencil. Good lure in the surf, good for dead drifting and current, but as a long range kind of soft plastic, This is my secret weapon. I wouldn't go out without this either. We're going to talk about getting your spinning reel ready for bass fishing. Please use a braid mainline. It's thin, it has no stretch, it cuts through the wind, it's perfect for lure fishing. But what we're going to do, we're going to need to fill our reel up slightly with backing. That might be old braid, might be monofilament. Secure it to your spool, grinner knot, uni knot, that kind of thing. Wind some monofilament on. Then you will tie your braid to that mono, your 150 yard spool of braid, that kind of thing. Bring it up on the reel, wind. Don't fill your reel too full, okay? Braid is a great mainline, but it can be quirky if you don't get it right, okay? Don't fill your reel right up. Like on this reel here, leave a nice gap before the top of the spool. And then I'm going to show you some tips and tricks about casting, how to literally manage your braid so you don't get in those dreaded wind knots or tangles. I want to keep you fishing. I want to make it approachable, easy to do, and we don't want to mess around with braid going wrong. We're going to do it right. We're now actually going to go fishing, and this is basically how I do it. I will walk miles set up like this. My lures are at my side. Always take a pair of pliers, crushing barbs, removing hooks from fish, and cutting braid and leader when you're retying. Then I'll always take a waterproof rucksack. Okay, I'm always carrying camera gear, so ignore that. But in that waterproof rucksack, bottle of water, flask of coffee, waterproof top, sunblock, car keys, mobile phone. But what I'll do is I will dump that rucksack down away from my fishing and go fishing. Then when I move, pick it up and move on. I'm gonna run you through basic lure casting, which I know is incredibly obvious to most of you, but a lot of us come from, big, heavy 6-ounce beach casters, smashing stuff out. This is a much subtler kind of fishing, and you think about it, we cast all the time. We cast, retrieve. You don't cast once but put you on a tripod. Casting with lure fishing is incredibly important. You know the crack with spinning reels. Braid over your forefinger, open the bail arm, look up, set the lure back, whack, like that. Always manually close the bail arm when you're fishing with braid, okay? Like that. Don't turn the reel handle to do it. For some reason, I don't know why, that helps to create wind knots. Get in the habit of cast, close, cast, close. There's one really important thing, okay? So your basic cast, as you know, is pull, punch, pull, okay? But we're trying to manage, this is not monofilament, this is braid, okay? Braid is brilliant, but you need to manage it. So cast, feather that braid down at the end. You need to make sure that braid is tight on the spool before you start retrieving, okay? A lot of bass fishing is done into the wind or in windy conditions. Wind might be behind you. So like playing golf, we need to adjust the angles at which we cast our lures to better get them out there. Plus, things like casting soft plastics. I will cast soft plastics, like my gravity stick paddle tail, like the slender scoop shad. I will cast them far smoother than I would a metal lure like a seeker, for example. I like fishing a lot of the time with the wind in my face to create that chop, that bouncy sea, okay? When the wind is in your face, don't, unless you're using a metal lure, which you can absolutely larrup, you're never going to overpower a strong wind, and we're going to lower our cast. You're almost trying to cast under the wind, okay? So if your natural kind of angle of release, let's say, is that, if the wind's in my face, I'll deliberately cast underneath the wind, lower release angle, and try not to get frustrated. You're going to cut your distance down, there's no way about it, okay? Casting into the wind, it's about placement and controlling the lure so it doesn't fishtail out. If you've got a wind behind you, you can almost let the lure float out on the wind. So when the wind is behind me, I will deliberately release my lure a little bit higher just to use that wind. So I'll just go bump like that. And again, I'm making sure my braid is tight off my spool, manually close that bail arm, because what you don't want are those loops over the front of the spool, because when you next cast, that loop will run off your spool and can create a wind knot, okay? You know how I told you I fished with soft plastics rigged on weedless hooks a huge amount of the time? A lot of that is more precision casting, and it's not generally about kind of absolute thumping kind of power. You're trying to get these lures out without tumbling in the air, okay? So it's a much smoother kind of cast. You're almost kind of like turning the lure over instead of trying to punch it, if that makes sense. And if you need to apply more power, just keep it smooth, really nice and smooth. I'll show you again, okay? And just always watch as well what I do at the end of the cast, because when you do it, you want it to become second nature. So nice and smooth, boom, like that. Make sure the line's tight, feather them down and or pull it off. Bail arm over manually, like that. And then the retrieve. When I'm fishing with something like a seeker, you know, a metal lure, I'm generally doing so because I'm punching into a strong headwind, or I want distance to try and reach, you know, feeding birds, signs of bait, signs of fish moving around. And these things you can wind up. You can hit them as hard as you like, but still stay controlled. Just go back. It's still, because it's a much more powerful cast, but it's still smooth. I'm concentrating on timing. I'm concentrating on my release angle. I'm not hitting it too hard, if that makes sense. Look, we've all got to learn how to do stuff. You know, some of us are new to fishing, some of us aren't. Sometimes casting doesn't go right. We want to punch and pull, but don't do something like this, okay? Don't go for extra. You're not going to get any extra distance by taking a hand off the rod and sticking out in front. And see what happens there? I'm out of control. I've got a loop of line over my spool. If I don't tighten that up, get it off, I'm going to get a wind knot the next cast. This may be a lot further down the line, but this is what I call a reverse cast, okay? When, let's say I've got a mate or there's someone fishing to my right, it's not safe. You know, I naturally cast over my right shoulder. If it's not safe to do so, I'll reverse cast. Or if you've got something blocking you here, I don't know, let's say I'm fishing, let's say trees here, an estuary. I'm trying to get my lure underneath those trees like that, okay? So I'll reverse cast, take it over my shoulder, like that. Just turn it over exactly the same way, feather down, over manually, tighten up. I really like that style of casting when I'm casting into the wind, because for some reason it forces me to cast lower my release point. I'm not saying go and do this, but when you feel really comfortable with that casting over your natural shoulder, just try that reverse cast. I'll show you once more, okay? Set up exactly the same. I'm going over my left shoulder, boom. When you go bass fishing, you're gonna have to change your lure at some point, right? Now, don't go back there to change it. It's a pain in the butt. Carry your lures with you, all right? But the whole trick is you're trying to keep, especially that spinning reel, you're trying to keep it as dry as possible. So my lure comes in, under my armpit, clamp the rod, unclip the lure. See, it's not falling in the water, especially if I'm out wading. I don't want my gear dropping down in the water. Open the lure box up, pick a new lure out, find the clip, clip him on, all set. Some people do that. I find it a bit of a pain. Honestly, use your armpit, because naturally, clamp your rod under there, Don't go, whoo, drop the rod, like that, bam. Your rod's secure, my reel's not getting wet, change the lure, clip him on, bang. When you go saltwater fishing, there are a huge amount of variables to think about. Don't go confusing yourself, but as and when you start catching fish, clock them. Remember when you caught them, firstly with the state of tide, think about what the wind was doing, think about the state of the sea, all that kind of stuff. You're starting to build up patterns, you're starting to learn your locations, when to fish them, when you think the fish might be there, what wind directions work the best. You're building up patterns. Never be afraid to move, never be afraid to fish different spots. Go on Google Earth, go walk in the coastline. You're trying to build up patterns and your levels of knowledge so you can feel more confident to attack new marks with the same kind of confidence you might go to your established marks.